So a survey came out in 2023, and it was in the Wall Street Journal, and it asked this question. Having more money, would that make you feel happier? Would that solve most of your problems? And if we were to take a brief survey across this room, I'm not going to do it because I'm afraid of what the answer might be. So I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but think about that. Percolate on that for just a minute. Would having more money solve most of your problems? And think about what most people would say in our country. And it may surprise you that a full 70% of people said yes. 7 out of 10 said having more money would make them happier or would make them feel like most of their problems would go away. And the interesting thing is they did, deeper level of research with this, and they said, well, let's look at the different kind of groupings of people. And there wasn't like one category where this was exclusive to. Even the folks that were in their above and beyond $200,000 a year range said, yes, they needed more income. A similar study in 2018 did something a little bit different, and it asked millionaires to rate their happiness on a scale of 1 to 10. And if they didn't say 10 as a millionaire, they said, well, predict how much money you would need in order to make yourself happy. And that research showed that slightly over half of those with a net worth of 10 million or more, I don't know anybody like this, a net worth of 10 million or more said their wealth would need to increase by at least 50% in order for them to be happy. That's just wild to me. That every range of person, every range of income level said, if I just had a little more, if I just had 50% more than what I have, even the folks with 10 million net worth, what does that teach you? It's a black hole, right? It's like those little dogs at the race that are trying to catch the little rabbit on the stick and they never quite catch it. It's like a hamster on the wheel. You don't get there. You never get there. You'll never, ever have enough. So if you think today, I don't have enough, congratulations. Like almost everyone else agrees with you. Even the richest of the rich to the poorest of the poor. Bigger, more will make me happy finally. But is that true? Well, Jesus addressed this claim directly in what's called the parable of the rich fool. You can already see where he's going with this, right? It doesn't take a brainiac to know that it's not going to be good for this guy if he's calling him a fool. But Jesus spoke on this a lot, on wealth and money, a lot in the New Testament. Not quite as much as he taught on the kingdom of God, but it's probably second or third. It's really high up there in the things he talks about because he knows how much we are involved in that thought process. And Luke, if you think about the author Luke, as he writes the gospel, he writes many times on the topics of wealth and kind of the contrast between what wealth does and what spiritual health does. And he talks about those concepts in a lot of context. So we'll look in Luke today, chapter 12. And we've been kind of going through these different ideas here in Luke, the different parables in all the Gospels, but Luke has kind of an interesting perspective, I think, as you look at the writing. He's much more methodical. He is more academic almost in approach. I at least I connect with a lot of his accounts, but we're going to look in Luke chapter 12 today. So if you want to look that text up or if you just want to listen to me read it out loud, that's fine too. But Luke chapter 12. And mine has written out there that this is the parable of the rich fool, beginning in verse 13. And so basically, Jesus has been teaching. If you look right before this and right after this, Jesus is just doing a lot of teaching to people. And someone calls out in verse 13. And they call out from the crowd, "Teacher, please tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me." So it's kind of an odd thing to happen, right? It's kind of an odd thing to happen. It's different than most of the other things that we see here where Jesus is answering questions or teaching stories. This is like someone just yelling out, kind of just like screaming out, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me." And Jesus pauses. Now, I assume that a lot of people are probably yelling things out at Jesus, but he stops for this one. And he says, "Friend, who made me a judge over you to decide such things as that?" And then Jesus said, "Beware. Guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own. Then he told a story. And this story is meant to kind of be the teaching on that concept. He's given you where he's going, and now he's teaching a story to help illustrate it to everybody. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. He said to himself, "What should I do? I don't have room for all my crops." And then he said, "I know, I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And then I'll have room enough to store all my wheat and other goods. And I'll sit back and say to myself, my friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for?" And the concluding statement then Jesus gives, verse 21, "Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God." We have to be careful there, don't we? He doesn't say you're a fool to save. He doesn't say you're a fool to save, but he does say you're a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. And that's really the key of what's going on here. You see, the reason he's called teacher is the same word as rabbi, okay? So they're calling him rabbi or Rabboni, and they're saying, "Teacher, judge this for me." And that was common in Jewish culture, that when there was kind of a dispute between family members or something civic in nature, they would bring it to one of the rabbis to decide. And so that's not out of character. This graphic that I have here is a piece of art done in 1585 by an author named Collier. I'm trying to remember where this one was from. This may be Finnish, but he kind of did this picture about this idea of building bigger barns, and the guy kind of saying, well, we've got to go, and you see it's vast fields. It wasn't like a small farmer, right? He's got a lot of people working for him, and so he already has a lot, and he wants even more. He wants to store it up and just to sit back and to rest on that kind of. And so Jesus teaches in this moment a teachable lesson on greed and on not maybe putting our trust in stuff. Because so many times we do tend to evaluate someone's worth by what they have. Someone drives a really nice car and we go, nice car, right? And we think of how they are in life. Kind of we mix up virtue and character with like wealth. And we'll think, well, they must be doing something right? And we don't think about all the other things that could be going on there. It could be crime that has achieved that. It could be they're leveraged up to their nose in debt, right? I mean, they're up to their eyes in debt. We don't know, but we have that thing that goes on, and in our culture, it kind of causes us to do those things. But Jesus would argue that that's not really a good indication. That's not the fruit you should be looking for. It's kind of a neutral fruit. It's not the fruit that we should be looking for, the external sign, if you will, of what we should be looking for. And so he teaches this. And, one of the statements that really jumped out to me is this in Luke 12:20, where he says, "You fool." God says to him, "You fool." I mean, that's a pretty rough thing to be called by God, right? It's meant to be jarring. It's meant to wake him up. "You fool, you will die this very night, and then who will get everything you worked for?" And I think we have to take a moment and really consider, have we been foolish about thinking about earthly things? Because we don't get to keep any of that, and none of it helps us after the grave. And so we work so hard and strive so hard and spend so much effort and energy and time on stuff that doesn't actually benefit us in the bigger arc of our lifespan. St. Basil said it this way. I thought this was a really good way to say it. He said, "What could be more ridiculous than this incessant toil?" He is addressing directly the rich fool parable. He says, "If you want storehouses," or the barns that was talked about, "you have them in the stomachs of the poor. Lay up for yourself treasure in heaven." I thought it was a really interesting way for him to address this idea of bigger barns. You want storehouses? They're there. They're there for you. They're in the stomachs of the poor. Store up your extra grain there would have been his indicator to this rich fool. instead of trying to make yourself comfortable and secure, because that security, God says to the farmer, you've lost it, you rich fool. You own this massive farm, and yet all of it is coming for nothing. Tonight, you will not even see that anymore. It reminds me of this cartoon that I saw. Sorry, sir, no baggage allowed. It's like the worst TSA you can think of, right? But as we face death, we can't take anything with us. And I've shown you pictures before of people trying to drive, U-Hauls into the grave or whatever. Then they're jokes. But this idea that we can take what we have with us. And I love this artist's particular representation because look at what the money is in. The money's in garbage bags and trash cans because it is literally worthless at that point. At the end of our life, it doesn't matter. You could have been the richest fool in the world or the poorest nice guy in the world, and none of that matters anymore. None of that goes on. None of that continues. It all dies with you. Or it goes to someone else, as he says. Someone else is going to have their name on all this stuff. I was reading in a magazine that I have subscribed to recently, a really good article. I don't care. I'm not retired yet, but if they're willing to include me in their little club and give me discounts, I was willing to sign up. So I get this magazine, all right? I was reading AARP magazine the other day, but I was talking about this guy named Jonathan Clements, and he is 61 years old, or he turned 61 last year. And it was talking about all the articles he's written over the last 2 decades for the Wall Street Journal. Over 1,000 articles this guy has written on personal finance. And one of his things that he keeps coming back to and keeps harping on is he says, you need to plan to live past 90, and you need to be saving accordingly. In fact, when he was not running marathons or riding bicycles, he was writing an article about this. Over 1,000 articles in the last 20 years in the Wall Street Journal. And his famous quote that I read was this. He said, most of us will live an amazingly long life and should not worry so much about dying young. He taught that if you wanted security in this life, you better save way more than you think you will ever need. You better save, 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 save. And then in the article, he talked about the sad turn that this story takes because last year he got a terminal cancer diagnosis at 61. And he had preached that money was what gave him security. Now, he hasn't gone back on that. He hasn't recanted on that. But he is definitely, in this article, it was pointing out how he's changed his perspective on a lot of that. Because while he thought money would give him security, like this rich fool, it failed him. And so he's doing some big trips and things and trying to compress a lot of life into the last year maybe that he has left. 61, Jonathan Clements. It makes me think about all the advice we take from other people and how much we give it our attention. And do they really know what they're talking about, or are they leading us to some different conclusion than Jesus has taught us? Because his wisdom is quite deep and wide for us to explore. St. Augustine, upon reading some of the text of Christ, wrote this. He said, the things which we cannot take with us are not ours. Only virtue will be our companion when we die. Your character, or what some cultures have called the heart, or what some probably misidentify as the soul. The values, the core, the character, the virtue, Ambrose said. Look at all those things you possess. Look at everything that has your name on it. Look at all the money in your bank account. Look at all the retirement savings you have. And at the end of the day, none of that goes with you. It all stays put, stays here. And so the question we have to have then is, are we focused and worried about building bigger barns for things that we cannot benefit ourselves with at the end, that do not provide security at the end of the day? Or are we focused on that relationship with God, with a God that's been very generous towards us, which exhibits incredible generosity towards us and includes us and welcomes us into his family and into eternity? In fact, forgives us of our wrongs because of his good grace towards us. In the wisdom literature in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, it says this in Proverbs 3:10, honor the Lord by giving him the first part of all your income, and he will fill your barns. Now, at first glance, we say, oh, well, wait a minute. Said not to build bigger barns, and now he's filling my barns. And so at first glance, we go, well, maybe there's a little bit of confusion here in the text. But the reality is there's a difference between hoarding in a barn and using a barn's savings to help. Hoarding and helping are the two oppositional ideas here. I can hoard and keep it all for myself. And we think of Charles Dickens' great character, Scrooge, right? Having all this wealth hoarded away, and yet he himself even is eating that little meal, that gruel that he eats for himself, and won't allow Cratchit to put a piece of coal in to keep his hands warm as he works. Or we could think about some of the people that we know that have been very charitable, that have given away the massive amounts of their wealth, and instead of hoarding, have used that to help others. There was an old saying I read once that said, do your giving while you're living, then you're knowing where it's going. I like that. You ever think about that? Like, why leave a huge estate at your death so people, that legacy is very quick, and I've seen that happen. It's very quickly over. It's like people are like, oh, that's awesome, and they move on. Why not be a part of that in the here and now as much as we can, and being generous with people in the here and now? Jesus taught us this. He said, wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. Interesting, he doesn't say, wherever your heart is, your treasure will naturally follow. No, he says, you want to know where your heart is, look where your treasure is going, and that's where your heart is. So as you think about where your heart is and you think about how this works together, I want to give you 3 options here for some next steps. I always like to drill it down to some practical next steps. I don't like leaving you hanging or just going, oh, that was an interesting teaching. I want to give you some ideas here. So if you're struggling with finances, a lot of this is, you feel like you're drowning already. A lot of it goes over your head, right? So I want to encourage you to look into financial peace. We have worked hard to put this package together so that we could have a site license for financial peace, and we could offer that to you for free. If you can't take our in-person class, take one of the online ones. The virtual ones are also free to you. We have financial counselors that will meet with you via Zoom, or we have Heather here in person who's taken the coaching course so she can coach you personally. There's free downloads of budgeting, all these ideas and helpful things. There's free videos and audios, thousands of hours of teaching online available to you. There's a budgeting software. So don't let that stop you from thinking about how to be generous. You may need to get back on your feet financially, but this would be a great opportunity for you. So in the app today, there are 3 buttons, and this is the first button. To enroll in Financial Peace University is a one-click button. It will open that up, and you can register for that course that starts this Wednesday night right here. Again, this is a thing that used to cost people $100 or $150 to take. It is completely free to you. You don't have to pay anything to take this course. The information is free to you. There's no products. There's nothing to sell to you. We don't have anything to sell to you. It is completely free. It is to get the information out there to help you get a better financial footing. The second thing is, if you want to explore generosity, you're ready to take that step, you can give. That button will take you to our giving page. It tells you about all the options. We actually have people that have given cars before. We have a company that will come take the car off of your house. I had it done with one of my cars once. They will pick the car up, sell it, and then the proceeds come back to us as a nonprofit. You can give every week. You can give once a month. You can give every other month, once a quarter, however that works for you. But if you're looking for a place to give, we would love to help you explore that generosity. And then maybe you're thinking longer term. You're thinking about your estate planning and what that looks like, and maybe you don't have a will done, or maybe you need help with that. We actually partnered with a group a couple years ago called Water's Edge, and they had a speaker that came and talked to us, and that service is still available to you. That doesn't ever shut down, and so that's always on our website, that link. But in the app today is a link there where you can go to Water's Edge and request that kit. They'll send you out a kit that has all the details, and some of you got that kit and started working on that. But basically, the cool thing about that partnership with them is they will pay the lawyer fees and everything to set up a will and to get it done the way that you want it, as long as you leave, I think, like a 10% or some percent of portion of your estate to a nonprofit. It doesn't have to be Coffee Creek. We would love it if you would, but you can give it to pretty much any nonprofit or church that you want to. And as long as you do that as part of your estate plan, they will do all that for free. They'll pay for the attorney fees, and they'll help you get that all set up. So again, 3 kind of things here to think about. Because at the end of the day, I hope that what we gather from this is that God has been so generous to us to reflect his character. We've got to be people that change our perspective and kind of live anti-cultural, right? Cross-cultural from what our culture says. Our culture is very focused on hoarding and taking care of number one. And Jesus lives a completely different way. It's why a lot of the reason that the people didn't understand what he was doing in his own time frame is because he was living life in a different way. They expected a king who was kind of zealous and greedy and powerful and charismatic to come in with an army and to take over from the Romans. And Jesus comes in as the suffering servant. He comes in willing to die for his people, to give his life for us. That challenged all the things they had built up in their mind about who Jesus was and what it was going to look like. And so I want to encourage you to choose to help now, not later, but think about it now. Begin to explore generosity now and not hoard, but instead see yourself as a helper. Align with God's heart for people. Align with his heart for the folks that are suffering right now, that need us, and that you can be a part of. That may be someone, it may be a need very close to you in your neighborhood. It may be someone in your school. It may be someone at work. It may be someone you know in the community.